Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles and from the Big Apple in New York City, welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I'm Dave, the Caregivers caregiver, otherwise known as Caregiver Dave, at caregiverdave.com, along with my lovely co-host Adrian Gruberg at thecaregiverspace.org. And we're coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on numerous syndicated radio and podcast networks on 25 global and audio-video platforms, including, well, I'll just mention some of them: iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, HealthyLife.net, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio, Blog Talk Radio, Mixcloud. All right, that's enough. And in fact, we are proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast in the top 50 on Player FM and #3 on FeedSpot out of thousands. And we have an especially exciting show planned for you today, don't we, Adrian?
Yes, of course we do.
Right on cue. Good girl. But before we get started, I do want to take a moment and thank my last week's guest, Kate Kunkel. And it was a great show, and you can listen to that show and all our shows on our membership website, caregiverdave.com, and any of those platforms that I mentioned above. So let's get on to today's show. Founder of Hope Loves Company, speaker, author, TEDx presenter, and podcast host, Jodi O'Donnell Ames. She's so important, she's got 3 names. And Jodi founded a nonprofit based in Pennington, New Jersey, whose sole mission is to provide educational and emotional support to children and young adults who have a loved one battling ALS. And I believe that's Lou Gehrig's disease, right?
That is right.
Oh,
thank you so much for having me, Dave.
No problem. And just a reminder that this is a live broadcast, and we I think we're on Facebook Live as well. But it's also recorded for all those other platforms tomorrow. But welcome to the show, and we are so excited to have you on. I always like to ask my guests, just who is Jodi O'Donnell Ames, and why was she placed on this green earth?
That is a great question. I kind of call myself a cool geek. Am I allowed to say that? I'm kind of a cool geek.
Okay.
From when I was very young, just a child who, was athletic and, had the ability to do different things, but simultaneously an empath, very sensitive, very caring and nurturing. So it's kind of an odd mix that, I grew up maybe with it as an old soul is a better way to put it.
Well, that's cool. Now, tell us just briefly what's going on in your life. How did you get involved in ALS and helping people? Because you must know something about it, right?
That's right. I learned about ALS when I was 29 years old, and my late husband, Kevin, was diagnosed. He was 30 years old, and we went to the University of Pennsylvania to get the diagnosis. We had, and you can appreciate the term we, as a caregiver. We received the diagnosis. We had a 2.5-year-old at home, and I had been a teacher at the time. I really didn't know a lot about ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, but have since learned a whole lot.
Well, I'm so sorry. 29 is such an early age to lose the love of your life. How long were you married at that time?
So we were married for 3 years at the time he was diagnosed at that age. I was widowed, though, 6 years later. So we both, Kevin lost his battle at the age of 36, and I was 35 when I was widowed.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you're practically still on your honeymoon period. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank
you. I bet you went through the grief process. Why don't before we get into your story, because grief is everywhere. I mean, especially with caregivers. Anytime you experience loss, you go through grief. There's the denial, this isn't happening, and then the anger, I'm so upset this is happening, and then the the bargaining, and then the depression, and then finally, hopefully, the acceptance. So what was your journey like with grief?
I love the idea of really normalizing grief, because what people don't understand, for the most part, if they haven't been in this situation, is that grief begins at diagnosis.
Right.
Grief begins when you get that horrific news that someone you love is ill and is terminally ill. And you know, as I know, that there's anticipatory grief. So grief
Yes.
and losses just continue throughout the entire process. There's the grief and loss of not having another child, and the grief of loss of not getting to see 10 years of marriage. There's grief and loss of not being able to walk our daughter down the aisle. So I think it's important to recognize that grief really begins with that news, because you're anticipating, your mind goes to all of the things that may
I
or may not
agree
happen.
totally.
Yeah. And
It's immediate with diagnosis. You know
yeah.
something's coming, and it just hangs over your head.
Absolutely.
And
And
then
we don't talk
there's
about that. We talk about grief after loss. That's what we talk about as a society.
yeah. And then
It's
we
much
talk
bigger than
about
that.
there's a lot of debate about, well, how long should we grieve? If someone is grieving 5 years and someone only grieved 2 years, says, well, you should get over this. And then, like a cat fight. So what's your opinion of how long should someone grieve?
I don't think that we have the right to tell anyone how long they should grieve. I think that grief is a very personal and individualized experience. And yes, we should all try our best to cherish memories and to live life beyond grief. But I think that we need to be cognizant that, experiences, especially if you're talking about losing a spouse or a child, these are part of our genetic makeup. These are ingrained in us. And we need to honor them, and really I tend to acknowledge them and then do my best to let them go. So, for example, in our home, my current husband lost his wife to ALS. I lost my husband to
Wow.
ALS. We have 3 children who all lost a parent to ALS. My niece lives with us. She lost both of her parents when she was 20. So there's grief all around. So at Christmas time, what do? We have a gift from them, right? We think of something that they would have given, and we recognize that we had these wonderful people in our lives. We honor them, and then we can go on because they're part of who we are.
Well, let me ask you, should we ever stop grieving? Is there hope that one day we can at least, I don't know, I haven't had a lot of loss in my personal life, except that my wife has lost her speech and her mobility, etc. And as bad as that may sound, it's nothing like losing a child or losing a wife, or I hear even miscarriages are traumatic experiences.
Very.
And I've spoken to a lot of people, and a lot of people says, you never get over it. So is there a difference between never getting over it, quote unquote, and not grieving anymore? I guess maybe
I'm
we
not
should define what the symptoms of grief is, because when I think of grief, you're not able to function, you're wearing the same clothes several days, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping right, and you're just in a depressed state of mind, and you haven't really reached that magic place of acceptance. So I guess my real question is, how long should we not be able to embrace acceptance and the new normal?
I always think of the book, I believe it was Joan Didion who wrote The Year of Magical Thinking. And
Yep.
she lost her husband, and for a whole year she thought her husband was going to walk through that door, right? And I always think of that book. Regarding grief and how long it takes, I think that, obviously you mentioned the word depression. If you are unable to function, parent, to, kind of return to society, then seek help. Talk to someone. Find a way. But grief itself, I think, just morphs. Like for me, it took me 10 years before I could say my husband's name without crying.
Wow.
And many times now, because I'm still in this world of ALS, through Hope Loves Company, I meet families. Today, I talked to a school counselor in New York who has is working with a 13-year-old whose dad has ALS. And just talking and having that conversation with what this child needs, I was in tears. So that's okay, because I'm human. I feel, I have emotions,
Empathy.
and I have empathy, and that's okay. However, if after I had that conversation, I had to go to bed and curl up and I couldn't function, then, I would seek help. And so there's a way, it's almost like, I can acknowledge this, I can be supportive and helpful and use my experience to help others, but I can also think about hopes and dreams. And that's, I think, the part where, if you're not hopeful for the next day and you're fighting depression, then that's time to really talk to someone.
Well said. So let's talk about when you were a little girl, and how did that play into your role as a caregiver today?
Being an empath is something that is not always accepted or understood when you're a child. That sensitive kid who, I would recognize when there was a child who didn't seem to have friends, and I would go over and befriend that child. Always caring and trying to bring respect and bring friendship to those in need. And I think that as a child, it got to a point where I wanted to not be who that was. I wanted to avoid being that sensitive child. And my TED Talk is about that. Like, who just reaches out to strangers and says hello and how are you and can I help you with the door when you're 12 years old? Who is that person? But when I tried to stray from who I was, I didn't feel positive about who I was. The more I tried to avoid it, the unhappier I was. So that's why I call myself in a way this geek, because as I said in my TEDx, when I was little at Christmas and there were parties going on downstairs, and I wasn't really into the huge gift party thing, I was just, would always find my space. Like I would need my little personal space. And I would just make random calls to strangers. I would pick up the phone back in the day and dial, and I would make phone calls.
You mean make up a number?
Yeah, no, I would just go through I would take the big old, those big fat phone books.
Oh.
Yeah, and I would open it up. And as long as it was within my, I didn't want to get in trouble and get punished by my parents by dialing, something that actually cost money. I would pick a number as long as it was in the same area code. And I would say, hey, happy holidays. And they'd say, who is this? And I'd say, just someone who cares. And, if you think about that, who is really home answering the call on Christmas or Christmas Eve? It was usually people who were alone. And I'd have these conversations with typically elderly people who were alone, and I was young. And that
was just from a random call.
Random call.
Wow.
And they would keep asking, but who is this? Is this Susan? And they'd say, no, it's just someone who, so I took something that is childlike, like the idea of a prank call, right? Just calling someone that you don't know, but turning it into a positive experience.
Wow.
So.
You were a very special little girl, and you're a very special little adult now.
Well, thank you.
Did your mother play a part in raising you, or this is just genetic, this is how you came out?
It's interesting because I was just talking to someone about this recently, and my parents were not educated. They didn't have a lot of knowledge about information. Those were not the areas that they were able to really guide me in. However, my parents would have given their shirt off their backs for a stranger. So they were very giving, very kind-hearted. And so from a very young age, I was a part of that process, and I enjoyed it. And it has always stuck with me.
And the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree.
That's what they say.
So how old were you when you really had your first caregiving experience?
Well, I started.
You had a lot of practice before you got
I've had
married.
a lot of practice, yeah. I really started babysitting when I was 10. And when I say caregiving, caregiving is, I just did a post on Instagram today. It's an expression of love, right? Caregiving is an expression of love. It takes a very special person like yourself to be a caregiver for a long time, but parents are caregivers, right? We're of our children in that sense. And as a babysitter, I started really using my nurturing. And I recognized that, at a young age, I was responsible, and I had the ability to really teach the child that I was working with, to play with them, to read to them. And also I thought of it as parents are out and they have something to do, and how could I make this, my experience as a babysitter, wonderful for them. So, for example, and I don't know if this happens
seriously, didn't you?
I did. I took it very seriously. I ended up nannying for years, but
I bet you were in great demand too.
I was. But the idea of, and I guess that's an empath, right? Putting how you would want something to roll out and applying that to others. But cleaning up the toys, doing the dishes, making sure that the tub was cleaned out from all their little letters when they were done taking them back. And that was my approach of, so in a way, the caregiving experience was universal to everyone in the family that I met. Like, how can I make this experience best for all of them? As well as, I think a big part of that, during that same time, my mother was kind of a caregiver to an elderly woman who lived across the street, who did not have any family. She was from England. And that whole experience of, I never knew anyone from another country, right? And she was, she brought that culture, having tea and having biscuits, which I knew nothing about. And
like Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yeah, and at a very young age, I would go over and sit with her to keep her company. And so, again, it was a sense that I knew that she was lonely. I knew she was lonely. She would say, she'd be yelling at somebody stepping on her lawn. That's how lonely she was. If someone stepped on her lawn, she was like, why are they on my lawn? Because she had nothing else to do. So
that was she communicated to someone.
She did. She exactly
touched someone.
She did. She had an interaction, and so again, that was another part of, wow. When I looked at the whole, looked at the eyes, maybe adult eyes as a child, of that there are a lot of people in need in different ways. That they need care.
Well, listen, we're going to take a break. I think you are the nicest person I've ever met, next to Adrian, of course. We're going to go on a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Dave Nassani, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too, Thrive to Stay Alive as a Caregiver. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. He now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his amazing caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's my life too. Thrive and stay alive as a caregiver will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today or buy one for your special caregiver. On sale everywhere and at caregiverdave.com. And we're back on the Caregiver Dave Show with our guest Jodi and Adrian, and I'm Dave. So, my goodness, I just like you so much.
I like you as well, and I have to tell you, this doesn't happen typically, but in your eyes are so much more brilliant on the screen than in your pictures.
Really?
So, yes, they are. They're gorgeous. They're a beautiful color.
Oh, you sound like my wife now. They're hazel, but it depends on what color I wear. Oh, thank you. Mutual Admiration Society here. So, how did you feel about caregiving when you started doing it? Obviously, you loved it, right? And you knew that this was something you'd probably be doing the rest of your life?
Yes, I feel that you receive so much more than you give in the caregiving experience. Yet I really and truly appreciate understanding that caregivers need to take care of themselves, and it's a topic that we at ALS, at our ALS group, at support groups, and at Hope Loves Company talk about quite frequently, because it seems like an impossible goal to take care of yourself when you're taking care of someone who's terminally ill. So I'm excited to learn more about that. But yeah, I always knew that it's something that brings me joy, and I learn a lot. I see currently taking care of my neighbor who lives with ALS, and last night I was there while she just started a BiPAP machine, and so I was there for 3 hours while she had it on, because she was nervous. She can't communicate. She can't move. So I sat next to her and worked while she had her BiPAP on. And
of course you did.
Well, the idea that someone, she teaches me so much about life, humility, strength, grit, passion. And so I benefit.
Adrian and I are in touch with lots of caregivers through our groups, of course, and many of them, I don't know if you would you say more than half of them, Adrian, just have not a great attitude. They don't have they don't have a love and an appreciation for it, and they don't consider it a joy. They're just miserable.
Not at all.
And
not
they
at
look,
all.
They look at the glass as not even half empty, just empty.
Well, a lot of them, the people who've been taking care of people for a really long time, and people who have ungrateful people that they're taking care of, who have terrible attitudes about their own illness and are totally abusive and unappreciative of what kind of loving care you might be providing, kind of make you want to take the love out of it. And you end up just being there to take care of them and not get the benefit of it. You know that I'm a natural caregiver too. I'm an empath. I got a great deal out of it. I went into it knowing exactly what I was in for, and had done it on many levels before, but once we got that diagnosis, I was just in it. I knew what was going to happen, and I was in it.
And some of your care receivers didn't treat you very well, and yet, you made the most of it. It's a hard enough job, but when they do stuff like that, it just really makes a hard job even harder. So my question, Jodi, is have you ever had someone like that who, didn't appreciate all of your positivity positivity and
No, I honestly can say that no. No
lucky
one has
you.
ever kind of pushed back at my positivity, but I can understand that we're all no one has to be a natural caregiver, right? It's not
Yeah, and
everyone's
many are
thing,
not. In fact,
Some
many have the
right?
personality and the traits and the gifts that are not conducive to caregiving, and that's why it's so hard
Absolutely.
for them. You're very fortunate to just be a natural born caregiver, and you enjoy it. And it's unfortunate that you had to actually become a caregiver to your husband and then actually lose him. That's the sad part. But you handled it very well, and you always look for something good to get out of it.
Well, I remember when Kevin was vented, when he was put on the ventilator, he was in the hospital for 8 days. And I did not leave the hospital. And because, as David knows, I'm very petite, I could just snuggle right in the hospital bed. And when the nurses, like in the middle of the night, tried to take blood from him, I'd be like, let him sleep. I'd pop up and say, please let him sleep. But after he was vented, he couldn't communicate. So I didn't want to leave him in a hospital
hmm
where he couldn't speak or
Sure.
move.
he had no
So,
voice.
and he had no voice. So I remember my brother-in-law came to visit, and sadly he has since to passed. But he came to visit, and we went down. He's like, "Come downstairs, let's have a cup of coffee." And I love coffee, so we went down in the hospital and had a cup of coffee. Um, and what he said to me was, "There's no doubt in my mind that you were put on this earth for this role." Because when Kevin couldn't speak, I could still read his lips. And I read
Yeah.
his lips for a year and a half after him being vented, which is something really hard. Like, not everyone is able to do that.
hmm
And and it really, your question and your statement goes back to who we are as individuals. And I think when Kevin and I were first diagnosed, I went into a support group where everyone just vented, 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 vented. And when I
Sure.
came home from that support group, I needed to do some kickboxing. you know, I needed to put some Nirvana on and do some kickboxing and get all that anger out of me because that's not who I am. So I think recognizing who we are, what is the end product that you want to accomplish? So if you're not able to provide the care, support the person who can. Support the family members who are caregivers, who are natural caregivers, and who want to be in that role. Support them in that role. Um, and that's where the whole idea of Hope Loves Company came in, because misery does love company. And I
Yeah.
didn't want to be about misery. And if you get into a group of people who are all complaining about that experience, that's okay. It wasn't for me. I didn't feel any better. I felt worse.
Did you
Yeah.
leave that group?
I did. I never went back.
Yeah. So
Good.
because you are the perfect caregiver, and don't feel funny that I'm saying that because you really are, even though no one is perfect, I'm sure you have your faults, I'm sure you have your moments, but how did burnout, I'm assuming you would periodically get burned out, that you would periodically start crying, you would periodically say, I can't take this anymore, and you'd have to put on the Nirvana and do the kickboxing more than once. But how did you handle the burnout? How did you handle when the kickboxing and the Nirvana didn't help? What did you do next?
It's such a great question, but I think everyone needs an outlet. Everyone needs an outlet that brings them joy. So for me, I had these two little things that I did, and it's going to sound really funny and simple, but I told you I like coffee. So when I was on night duty with Kevin and the nurse came at 7 a.m., and before I had to get Alina up for school, I drove to Wawa, honest to goodness. I got a cup of coffee and a bagel and the paper, and I sat in the car and read and cried. That's what I did every day. And half the time, I don't even know, I think I was still in my PJs and I could care less. Um, but I sat there, I got it out, And, you know, if you listen to a really sad song, it really helps that process. You know, and you
Yep.
listen to a sad
So
song,
you were encouraging it.
I
I've
was
got
encouraging it.
I've got
Yeah,
that song for me.
yes,
Whenever I need it, I have my go-to song.
Whenever you need a good
great.
cry, you mean?
Yep.
So that
Yeah,
it
you
just comes out full
Yep.
blast. What is
come
that
out.
song, by the way, Adrian?
It's from Falsettos. It's from a musical. It's
Mm,
it it's called Where Would I Be If I Hadn't Met You? Who would I be if I hadn't met you?
Well, it's nice to know that even a
love it.
perfect caregiver needs to cry and needs to vent and needs to blow off steam and needs to have coffee and a bagel in her car all by herself while she's crying, listening to a sad song, because that just means we're all human too,
Yes.
and there is no such thing as a perfect caregiver. Some are better than others, but we can learn, right? We can learn to be a better caregiver. Have you been teaching other people how to you know thrive as a caregiver, how to do it better, how to I want to say the word survive, but some people surviving is good enough if they're not even surviving, and then once they survive, then maybe they can shoot for thriving. But you're helping people, right?
I think just from making the initial call, so everyone who comes to Hope Loves Company, has someone they love with ALS, and just starting that initial conversation, a voice on the other end who has survived, and not only survived but has raised three incredible children, and who now adults, and who has still followed her dreams, and also has simultaneously done something truly valuable in memory of Kevin. So I think just having those very candid conversations. Will I ever be able to? I just had a conversation yesterday. You will appreciate this. Will I ever be able to eat meatloaf again? Now, what does that have to do with caregiving?
It was
Do
probably
you know
his
what that?
favorite dish. I don't know.
So, what happens when someone's sick, right? We bring them food. We bring meatloaf. We bring lasagna. We bring things that we can make in bulk and feed our family and feed
Chicken
another
soup.
family. Right. So this gentleman who just lost his spouse to ALS can't look at meatloaf. He can't look at meatloaf. Will I ever be able to look at meatloaf again without thinking of my wife dying? So I think just starting to connect with positive people who accept you for who you are, where you are. We are all in a different part of this place in this journey. Um, we all face it differently, and we all take different time to get to a place where we feel normal again. It took me years, and I do my best, and I wouldn't say I was coaching or teaching, but I do my best in giving hope while also recognizing that it's okay to still be grieving or still be, in tears when you see a commercial about something that resonates. That's okay.
Yeah. Was there
I don't
anyone?
think
Go
I
ahead,
don't think
Adrian.
it's necessarily teaching, but there's this aspect of being a good guide or being an escort to just help someone along the way and be there for them. And that part of it, even though you might not think of it as teaching or coaching, it has that effect. Buoys them
Thank
up.
you. Thank you. I agree with that. I know that I would call people who were further along in the ALS journey, and I needed to, ask questions, and now people are doing that for me. So I
Right.
really look at it as paying it forward and being the resource that I was able to receive
Yeah.
when I
Who
needed
did
it.
who did you look to the way people look to you? I mean, did you have an inspiration
In the caregiving role,
in the caregiving world? Yeah.
yeah. So, you know, Kevin was very young when he was diagnosed, but there were several other um, loving couples who were in the journey who were 20 years older who, I saw what they were doing, how they were helping to feed someone, how they were wiping their mouths afterwards, fixing their head that, they can no longer hold up. To me, it was, I looked at it and thought, well, this is pretty normal, right? This was normal for them, and it can be normal for me.
Sure.
So what was your favorite activity of taking care of yourself? Some people go for their hobbies. Like I like to sail, I like to ride my bike, I like to get a massage. What were your self-care favorite things to do? I'm
laughing because I have some great caregiving stories that I can share with you that are pretty funny. But
share all
but
you want.
I'm going to start with my first investment was an 80-pound boxing bag and a speed bag. Now, I weigh 96 pounds, so if you think about if you think about this large 80-pound boxing bag, and I had my brother come. My brother came, and in our garage, he put in a heater. He installed a heater, and a wall, and on the side of the wall, he installed the 80-pound punching bag and the speed bag. And then I got myself, a kind of a kick butt stereo, put it out there. And when the nurse came at midnight, so we had a nurse from midnight to 7, I would go out there and just work out. And that really was my saving grace. Working out and connecting with others.
Did you get good on the speed bag?
I got pretty good. Yeah, it's actually, I still have it. It's in the basement. I haven't used it for a while, but I still have my boxing gloves and my, I did give away the punching bag.
Oh.
I still have the speed bag, but my nephew wanted the punching bag, so I passed that along.
Wow.
But that was something that, I had this, the way that I look at it is I had this energy, and it could either be a positive energy or a negative energy. So I knew I had to utilize it in some way to keep that energy positive.
Where'd you get the idea of the bags, though? Did you get it from somebody else, or just you just wanted to hit something, or where did that come from?
I needed to be strong because I, again, am a small woman. My husband was 183 pounds. When he passed away, he was 143 pounds. But I did everything from clean his feeding tube, change his trach, roll him, shower him, change the bed sheets, move him in the Hoyer lift. I needed to be strong, and that was something that I do believe that we should be strong, and it was something that I had to work on to get strong enough to be able to do those things. So it was a nice combination of stress relief and strengthening simultaneously.
Now, be honest with this next question. A lot of people, sometimes feel resentment, guilt. They don't like what they're doing, and they wish they would just have the courage or whatever to just walk out, desert. I know nobody would ever do that, but is it wrong to have those feelings?
I don't think it's wrong to have those feelings. Life is hard, so we have those feelings. As parents, sometimes we're like, wow, if I could just strike for a week and not do any cooking, cleaning,
right,
and have my kids totally be self-reliant, wouldn't that be great? So we're normal, we're human, so we do have these feelings. Again, I highly recommend that you talk about them. And my mother-in-law once said something that I thought was interesting. So I did end up hospitalized twice for fatigue.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So that's your burnout.
For low blood sugar, which I have a lot of energy, and sometimes just getting engrossed in that role, I would forget to eat, and then I'd pass out, and then I'd end up at the hospital.
Wow.
And what she said to me was, you look at caregiving as a plate, right? One person could cook the entire meal and be exhausted, or you could gather as a group and somebody provides the salad, Somebody provides the vegetables, somebody provides the meat, and you fill that plate as a whole group. And I think after the second time I was in the hospital, I really understood what she was trying to say. Mm-hmm. Allow everyone to bring their skills to the table. And as I'm currently caregiving for my neighbor, it's the same thing. You know, someone comes to help with her nails, someone comes to help with her BiPAP, someone helps her go to swimming. And that way, when you you not only give everybody the opportunity to have quality time with someone they love, but you also, the way she stated it, which again has resonated with me, is you also allow that person the opportunity to learn and grow from that experience. So to be a better person. If we're not, if we've never been exposed to caregiving, something that's could be a common problem, like waiting in line at the bank, might just totally throw your day for a loop, right? But when you've recognized that somebody can't move or speak, and they're dependent on you for this, really just for life, for sustainability, it changes your perspective. So when you think about caregiving as an opportunity to grow and learn and evolve, to be the best person you can be, that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah. What are some things that you would often feel guilty about?
Oh, wow. I know what I really felt guilty about. When Kevin was vented, he could no longer speak or eat. And I couldn't eat in front of him. He loved food, loved it, loved his cheesesteaks, loved his steak, loved his pasta. And, to have to sustain on formula, on a feeding tube, that just broke my heart that he couldn't enjoy that pleasure of food. So I knew I couldn't eat in front of him. I would eat in the other room or sneak food, but I couldn't just eat in front of him.
And how did he feel about that?
He encouraged me to eat. He would
in front of him, or
in front of him. He's like, you got to eat and just do it. It's okay. So eventually,
was it really okay with him?
It was okay. He was an amazing man, and
it was your problem, the guilt.
It was my problem. It was my guilt.
Because you're so compassionate and empathetic.
I have a question about whether or not Kevin was ever outwardly angry. If he could express how angry he was that this is what was happening to him, and how the two of you dealt with that.
I wouldn't say that we were ever, and he was ever angry. I'd say he would get anxious about things that he couldn't control. So, for example, after being ventilated, we were there at the hospital for a week. We came back, and then he had an impacted bowel. That happens. Then we had to go back to the hospital. He would get anxious about it.
Right.
But not mad, but anxious. And the way that we dealt with that, and the way we dealt with the whole illness, was to really share it with everyone we loved. We had our priest come in and read with us each week, so we focused on the things we could control. And we also did some just fun things to quote unquote celebrate the crazy things that were happening. So, for example, when he could no longer lift his arms well, we had kind of a cutting party where we took all of his shirts and we brought people over and we cut the shirts down the back. Right? He's in a wheelchair, so you can't see the back of the shirt.
Right.
And we would put them on this way. So we had a cutting party. We had it's probably not legal, but we watched The Survivor, and we had a pot going for gambling for who's gonna it was like $1 each. But we had a party of 20 people, and we all put in $1 to see who was going to get kicked off the island. We made it fun. I remember vividly when Mike Tyson had a fight, and bit off someone's ears. We took pictures of everybody
Evander
biting
Holyfield.
their
Evander
ears off.
Holyfield.
Exactly, Evander. And so, we just tried to embrace the parts of life that were fun and beautiful, regardless of ALS, and to control the things that we could. And then the things that we couldn't control, we're like, okay, we can't control this. How can we make this normal for us in our world?
The new normal.
And so we did these things.
Well, listen, we're going to take another break, so we'll be right back. Don't go away.
One Arm, One Leg, 100 Words, Overcoming Unbelievable Hardships, is about Charlene, a stroke survivor. Back in 1996, Charlene was a healthy, normal, very active 52-year-old woman whose amazing talents resemble that of both a Martha Stewart and a Wonder Woman. But all that changed when she suffered a massive stroke that left her severely speech impaired and paralyzed on the right side. Who am I? My name is David. I've had the privilege of being Charlene's husband since 1975. We had a wonderful fairy tale, storybook-like courtship that culminated in our marriage a year later. Charlene had just come out of a marriage where after 10 years, she received 2 black eyes and a broken nose by her former husband when he came home high on speed. Charlene believed in no second chances of any kind for abuse, so she left. Finding herself all alone in the world with her 5 and 10-year-old daughters Cynthia Lorraine and Deborah Lynn, she started raising them by herself for the next 2 years. Then fate brought us all together. After falling in love with Charlene, Cindy, and Debbie, our love then produced Rebecca Elizabeth. We had a wonderful, normal life for the next 20 years. But today, things are very different for everyone. How about the reaction of 9-time Grammy and Dove Award recipient, the godfather of contemporary gospel Christian music, Andre Crouch? Charlene just won't let the promises of God go, and she has not let her circumstances get in the way of her faith. She's not just a survivor, she's more than a conqueror, as the Bible states. You'll be encouraged by her testimony, regardless of what you're going through. Available everywhere.
And we're back on the Caregiver Dave Show. I'm Caregiver Dave, and we're with Jodi O'Donnell Ames and our co-host Adrian Gruberg. And while I was watching that, I don't think I've really watched it for a long time. I was thinking, God, if what happened to you happened to me so early in my marriage, I would have been devastated, So I think God just gives us what he knows we can handle, and for some reason, you're a strong lady, and he knew you can handle that. And it doesn't sound fair, and maybe one day we'll find out why bad things happen to good people, but it sure does happen a lot. But getting back to caregiving, what encouraged you? Books, websites, support groups. What helped you? Besides, sheer willpower and determination to stay alive and stay out of the hospital.
There was a great book called Share the Care. Are you familiar with it?
I've heard of that one, yes.
I know her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Called Share the Care. And my sister-in-law brought that to us, and she organized a group of 60 people, Dave, 60 people who helped us.
Wow.
With things that we needed to do. So that was a huge
Where'd
resource.
you find 60 people from?
Well, they were family and friends, and they all...
Big
so
family.
Share the Care is about getting a group of volunteers together to help provide care for someone who's chronically or terminally ill. And, for example, the 60 people... it was just the people who wanted to, in some way, shape or form, bring their talents to our needs.
Wow.
And so we needed an addition because Kevin could no longer get upstairs to the bedroom. So some of those men helped to build the addition. Some of the women helped to paint it. Somebody brought meals. Somebody picked up prescriptions. And that was extremely helpful because
I bet.
The idea
have you passed that on to other people?
I have.
Because
I
that
use
was
it constantly.
Yeah,
I'm
Sheila,
constantly sharing that with others. And even my neighbor, as I'm talking about her friends, someone is coming in and decorating her house for the holidays. So it's that same idea, because
Yes.
we all want to feel normal and we want to get these things done, but we no longer have the time or the energy or the resources to get them done. So if people can pitch in and help, then the end result is still the same. You still have your groceries in the refrigerator, you still have the prescriptions you need, you still have the addition, and we were just really lucky. And I think that's because we were so young, we had a group of young people who
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
were willing to just roll up their sleeves.
Yeah. Yeah, you've answered a lot of my questions and you've given a lot of advice. Is there any advice that you haven't given yet that you would like to?
Absolutely. I try to share this with families, but make sure that if you are in a caregiving role, that your local police and your local fire department know what's happening in your home, and also to have all of the information, the medical information on the refrigerator, because I was an EMT for 5 years, and when you walk into a home with somebody there who's unconscious and no one else is there, it's nice to have those resources available so you can get the best care you need.
Yeah.
And
Good
and
advice.
also, yeah, and also the funny story that
You were an EMT?
I was an EMT for 5 years. After Kevin
Wow.
passed, I wanted to give back. We At one point he was still using the bathroom, toileting by himself, and he went to get up from the toilet, fell right back down, and ended up, and I don't know how, ended up around the toilet on the floor. So like an L shape, and he hit the back of the toilet, so there was water everywhere. So I had to call the fire department. So so many times I needed help like that. And so I wanted to pay it forward and became an EMT and rode the ambulance for 5 years, providing
Wow.
that help to others in my community after he passed.
Okay, what were you saying before I interrupted you about that?
Oh, the last thing I was going to say is that those things happen, and we're not prepared, and we try to live in the present. What can I handle today and how can I handle it without looking too far ahead sometimes? Or
Yeah.
so we got a generator because Kevin was on a ventilator,
Mm-hmm.
and we got a generator, and he had a hospital bed that was an air mattress to prevent bed sores.
Mm.
So I'm alone with him. The power goes out. I had to run into the garage to turn on the generator. And in that moment, his ventilator went off and the bed engulfed him because it was an air mattress. So whenever I meet people who are in this role, think of the things, the wild, crazy things that
Mm-hmm.
can happen, and have a plan in place. Because to not have any light and figure out how to start a generator to get the ventilator and the bed back, and to come back into the room to see him engulfed. I mean, literally the mattress just like engulfed him.
Did you panic?
And I panicked, but I knew I had to react, and I had to go in and do that, and that there was only one answer, and that was to get the generator going. But to
Is it the
practice
kind
these,
that you had to pull the
yeah,
cord
it was.
like a lawnmower?
And to actually, I'm a visual learner, and I am a doer. So for someone to say, this is how this generator works, is not going to work for me. I had to have the plan out. I had to have a flashlight by it just in case,
Yep.
and the instructions, and I had to try it a few times so that I actually knew what to do, because when you're in an emergency situation, right, you have that fight or flight, and sometimes it's hard to think clearly.
Wow, that is interesting. So we're just about wrapping this up here. How can people get a hold of you or learn more about ALS, do you only do the ALS, or any caregiver will do, or tell me how that is?
Oh, no one has ever asked me that question, Dave. But
Adrienne has many different groups, that,
okay.
and so there's some groups out there that will only do, no, we're only cancer, no, we're
Oh,
only
right.
stroke, and
Absolutely.
I was just
Well,
wondering if you were also.
if I can be of help to someone, they can definitely reach out to me. So there's, if it's specific to ALS, there's hopelovescompany.com. All of the information is there. And when you connect with Hope Loves Company, I will be calling you as the first outreach, the first touch to share this journey. I also have this book. Someone I love has ALS, so I send that out as well. But if you're a caregiver and you would like to speak with someone or just connect with me, you can also reach me. My website is joaspeakson.com. I'm a coach, speaker, and as you mentioned,
Yeah.
and I'm also now a podcast host. So I have a podcast that I'm doing on life stories about resilience and hope. So
We would both be happy to be on your show if you have
oh my gosh, I was
availability.
going to say that. I would love to have you on. I've only done one episode right now, but I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I thank you for all that you're doing and demonstrating as an example and mentors
Sure.
to others.
Let me
Thank you for
know
what
if
you're
you need
doing.
any help, producing the
Yeah, we're
show or
here.
advice or anything like that.
Yeah, thank you. And happy birthday early, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
including me in this wonderful
Thank you. And then
show.
what if somebody wants to see your TED Talk? How do they do that?
So, if you Google my name, Jodi O'Donnell Ames, and I always laugh when I say this because I've just kind of gone with the flow, but there are 13 pages of resources available between books and television and
With your name on it?
yeah.
Congratulations. That's not
Yeah.
easy to
Thanks.
do.
Well, thank you. You just speak about this, right? A lot of people
Yeah.
aren't talking about caregiving, Dave.
No,
They're
and
not.
that's a big
Yeah.
problem.
It
Right.
needs to be in some government healthcare plan somewhere.
Yeah,
It's in
no one's talking
Hawaii.
about this.
Hawaii has a $1,500 respite payment that any caregiver can apply for. It doesn't matter how much money you make or you don't make.
But that's
It'll.
only for a certain number of people a year or a certain
Well,
amount of
they only have so
money.
much money, so it only goes
Yeah,
so far. But
right.
each year they try to increase it more and more, and
We're
the more.
trying to get stipends for caregivers through the government.
I was just going to say some states do provide stipends now. I think Massachusetts is one of them. It's a monthly stipend, and I think that's a great first start, but we have a long way to go.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
well, as politicians start to become caregivers, then the awareness will increase. So there you
So
go.
true. That's so
And
true.
unfortunately, a lot of the politicians are multimillionaires, so they just hire somebody. But hopefully,
Well, you got Rosalind Carter.
that's true. But she's a very nice person, and you're a very nice
Yes.
person. And it was so nice meeting you. So nice having you on the show. And we're going to do it again sometime. And thank you so much for coming on the show. And Adrienne, thank you for
You're welcome.
being here every week. And I think I'll just say bye-bye. We'll see you next week.
All right, thank you.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.